Welcome everyone for our Telosa webinar series. My name is John Mallon. I'm the CEO of the Telosa Community Foundation, and I'd like to thank you for taking time to join us today. This is a new format for us. It's the first that includes a webinar, and you'll hear from a series of experts, subject matter experts, and a focus group discussion, which will be an interactive session and really an opportunity to hear from you. Our topic today is building a world-class city, community connections, and we're applying a methodology where we're researching really the best practices, around the world. And the research really demonstrates that when you have a strong sense of community, cities will thrive and flourish and can become very successful. And community is really about working together, where you're working for the greater good, or everyone has an opportunity to succeed. And it's by working together that we can really realize the full potential, both for the individual and for society. And, cities are, where people come together, and when there is a strong sense of community, there's more dynamism and there's more vibrancy. And this translates into some very real, tangible benefits, both economically and socially. And strong communities, as the empirical data clearly shows, are safer, they're more welcoming. People take pride in their cities. There's more economic opportunity. People are healthier, they're happier. They celebrate differences as a strength, and they share a sense of optimism and pride for what is possible. And that's really at the core of the mission of Telosa. And it's really community as the focus of Telosa, because it's always about starting with people and a mission to create a more equitable and sustainable future. So our vision is to apply the mission to a new city and to create a blueprint based on the lessons that we learn that can benefit existing cities and help us together build a new model for the future. Our core values are to be open, fair, and inclusive. And these are the principles that shape how we work and how we make decisions. And community is a key part that really brings it all together. So when we start with a clean slate, it really offers the opportunity to co-create with you as our community, and to share ideas and to innovate without some of the constraints imposed by legacy issues. We can reimagine how we design our cities to work better for people in our community, and learn and apply these best practices. And our research has taken us all around the globe, and what we found is that there's no one city that's doing it all. However, there are numerous cities that are successful with key concepts, with programs and ideas, such as Milton Keynes in the United Kingdom on design, Reston, Virginia, with a real focus on social capital, Copenhagen in Denmark, with a focus on effective government services and a strong social safety net, Singapore as sort of an economic growth engine, Raleigh on education and lifelong learning and training, and Portland, Maine with arts, culture, and recreation. All these cities will be featured in our Telosa Community Findings Report, and you'll see this on the screen, and we'll include a link there. So we'll be discussing these a bit further tonight. So I guess getting into the opportunity, it's really twofold, and it's to begin to take the ideas and concepts and make them actionable and impactful. And we want to hear from you, both in our focus group discussions, which will be starting shortly. First one is really about hearing from you and what's working in your community to inform our draft findings report. And we're working to create and share what will become a very comprehensive guidebook of best practices that we intend to share with city officials and residents to highlight best practices to help them strengthen their communities. And the second area is around a new index. Would be a sort of useful tool for city leaders and residents as well, to use and make decisions to improve community. And we have a unique opportunity to work with our partner, Polco, leading provider of community engagement and analytic solutions that works with hundreds of cities across the United States. So we'll be going into greater detail on the index and really want to hear from you. And we'll be introducing Michelle and Tobin shortly. But before we go into details on the index, I do feel it'd be helpful to start with a brief historical perspective, and want to introduce Tom Rossman, who's a historian and a senior advisor to our Telosa Community Foundation. He's a board member of the Henry George School of Social Science, chairman of the Education Committee, and a global financial consultant and emerging markets expert. So with that, Tom, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thanks, John. As John mentioned, from the beginning, we've been conducting extensive analysis of cities around the world and really exploring why cities have succeeded or failed throughout history as well. And one point has become exceedingly clear to us, and that is strong communities are essential to have cities thrive and flourish in both historical context and in our modern day. In fact, the cities that have had the highest level of social cohesion, shared sense of purpose, and elevated levels of what contemporary social scientists call social capital were vibrant, healthy, and successful. It is clearly the social bonds, the networks of reciprocity, and the belief that we're all in this together that really distinguishes successful cities from unsuccessful cities, both in today's context and throughout history. In fact, we've named our city Telosa, and the reason is that it comes from the Greek word telos, which means ultimate aim or highest purpose. Now, early on, the Greeks recognized that the community is a very essential element for success of their society. And to them, it was not sufficient just for individuals to have the opportunity to succeed, but that the entire city must flourish and thrive for each and every person to reach their full potential. So Telosa is the name that comes from that and has inspired our work from the very beginning. And sort of to summarize the Greek view, their belief is that strong communities is the foundational element of strong societies and strong cities. So we found that this is an essential element in cities around the world as well. And as you see in our report, we actually go into very great detail in showing how strong communities have a definitive link to successful, thriving, flourishing cities. So if we move to the next slide, if you look at U.S. history, this is of the waxing and waning of community over the last 150 years. And as you can see, we reached a high point in the early 1960s. And at times when we had a strong sense of community, we witnessed expanding shared prosperity, greater political cohesion, strong social bonds, and a much more culturally unified society. In other words, we had a strong sense that we were all in this together. Just look at the high point in the early 60s and consider what we were able to achieve with that. We passed sweeping civil rights legislation. We put a man on the moon and safely returned him to Earth. We massively reduced poverty. We actually cut the poverty rate in half over that period from 1959 to 1969. And we had the strongest working class and middle class shared prosperity in the history of humanity. And this is really, that trend, unfortunately, as you can also see from the chart, has kind of significantly begun to decline in the past several decades. And many people are feeling left out and disconnected from society. And as a result, we haven't been able to achieve the great things that we have achieved in the past. Also recognizing that even though we did achieve great things in the 1950s and 60s, there were also many groups that we still have a long way to go to work on in terms of inclusion and equality. So next slide, please. So strong communities lead directly to greater opportunity. And as you can see from this slide in the chart, greater opportunity leads to greater shared prosperity. and more jobs and greater economic activity. In fact, at the same time, the converse is also true, as you can see from the chart, that weak communities have lower opportunities, slower growth, and grow into and typically go into decline. Now, we have compiled extensive empirical evidence, and you can see it in our report if you take the time to download it. Excuse me, but this evidence clearly indicates that, and the data clearly indicates that strong communities yield definitive benefit for the mental and physical health of a community, the improved educational outcomes, greater civic engagement, better governance, increased life satisfaction and quality of life, and greater shared prosperity and jobs for everyone. In other words, if you want to be healthier, happier, wealthier, and have the highest quality of life, a strong community is an essential element. So I will now introduce the wonderful Dr. Krista Daniels, who is a urban planning guru. And you can see her various accolades, but she is a professor at Antioch University and a tremendous source of information and ideas regarding community and the successful application of some of the things we're talking about.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Great summary of social capital and the importance of community. So I'm just going to quickly give a few blips from our report that will be helpful before we hear from Holco, and then we go into our focus groups to kind of center the conversation. And so what we have found through the research we did is that there's 6 vital characteristics that keep coming up in best practices, literature reviews that are essential for creating a vibrant and thriving community. There's also safe, welcoming, and inclusive. So we synthesized many critical findings from Putnam's work and also took findings from the American Planning Association and National League of Cities. And so here you'll see the 6 different characteristics we came up with. And Tom started talking already a little bit about the social capital and belonging. And this is based on that we have found that in thriving communities, there is a strong sense of social cohesion and trust among residents. People feel a genuine connection with one another, which leads to higher levels of collaboration, mutual support, and a willingness to work together for the common good. So for community members to feel a sense of belonging, they need to feel invited. They need to feel known, their voices heard, accepted, supported, befriended, needed, and even loved. So this is a very important characteristic that we found. Another important characteristic we found is access to effective government and services. An effective government that is responsive and transparent is foundational to a thriving community. Government can create trust and accountability by actively engaging with citizens and incorporating their input into decision-making. And that always leads to efficient service delivery and inclusive governance. So in this type of government, you'll see decision-making processes that are open. Residents have opportunities to provide feedback and be part of the planning and development of their community. They actively participate in local governance, community organizations, volunteer activities, to shape the community's future. Another essential characteristic is high quality jobs and economic opportunities. Communities must offer economic opportunities for all residents, regardless of age, to find meaningful employment and build successful businesses. A robust local economy supports job creation, financial stability, and overall prosperity within the community. So employment opportunities, a robust local economy, and support for entrepreneurship enables residents to achieve economic stability and growth. Another important characteristic. It's also important to mention that there's a key element here, the importance of household wealth and the ability to pass it along to future generations. This has been well documented. Maintaining positive wealth, what is owned, is crucial for a household's economic security and protects against economic crisis and access to political power. So you'll see in our framework, which I'll talk about in a few seconds, possible action steps to enable that and support that, the household wealth and passing it along to future generations. Another characteristic is education and lifelong learning. A community that values education and supports lifelong learning opportunities for all ages consistently is designated a desirable place to live. So that type of culture, creating a lifelong learning, empowers citizens to upgrade their skills, to fill the needs of a changing workplace, and continue to contribute to the community. This includes quality educational institutions, libraries, and workshops that empower residents to grow and acquire new skills. Another important piece of this is access to education, from preschool to higher ed. It's got to be available to ensure residents have opportunities to learn and grow. And the last two, arts, culture, and recreation. They're vital components of a vibrant community. And these elements celebrate and showcase the community's diverse histories, cultures, and traditions. So cultural events and recreational activities not only provide those benefits, but they also stimulate the local economy by attracting tourists sometimes, supporting local businesses, creating jobs. And we have documented there are numerous mental and physical benefits by supporting and creating parks and greenways, so residents can connect with nature and engage in outdoor activities. The last one is design and environmental stewardship. Urban design is pivotal in creating sustainable and resilient cities. We need to incorporate principles like compact layouts, green infrastructure, efficient public transportation, mixed use. All of these design elements help reduce our environmental impact, they encourage mobility, and they mitigate climate-related vulnerabilities. Thriving communities are known to be resilient and adaptable to change. In addition, design also encourages greater inclusion by ensuring that workforce and affordable housing are built into the initial infrastructure, so it avoids dividing neighborhoods by income, race, or ethnicity. The next part of the report is probably the one you're looking for, which is our framework. So this is how a community could implement the 6 characteristics. And that involves strategic planning, community engagement, collaborative actions. But I put a sample snapshot of the report here so you can see how it's laid out and how it showcases which municipal department or office should be facilitating or co-facilitating the action so it comes to fruition. You can go through the report, and each of the 6 characteristics has action items with best practices so you can see what's happening throughout the world. So I've included just 2 quick examples to showcase so you can get a sample of what it looks like. And then we're going to pass the mic over to Polko to talk about the proposed index. So for example, if you clicked in the social capital and belonging table, there's an action step that recommends to conduct town hall meetings and community forums to encourage resident participation, and that the meetings should be dispersed throughout the community, not a one and done town hall. And one way to do this is to bring the meetings to the citizens through innovative engagement techniques such as meeting in a box, post-it note billboards, and other online opportunities. So the example we have here is actually from We Chicago, because they're a leader in implementing a tactic called meeting in a box. And so if you go to the link, you can see how they're doing that. And this is where it takes you. So you can learn about meeting in a box and how to do that and how to implement that in your community. Another example is from the design and environmental stewardship section. And here we're looking at how can a city become zero waste? And we have San Francisco listed in this category because they're a leader actually in zero waste in this country. The idea of zero waste is not to send anything to a landfill. They've come up with laws to sort recycling. They've diverted over 80% of their waste from landfills. They collect food waste, yard trimmings, and they compost a significant portion of their waste and send them to composting facilities. They use that compost and they sell it to organic farmers and vineyards. They even have a textile initiative where they take clothes, linens, rags, all textiles, and they go to a reuse and recycling center. Think of zero waste as a goal and circular economy or circular cities as the way to get there. And in that category, we have Sweden as a leader in circular economy. And that's where they've eliminated or trying to eliminate the linear pathway of take, make, and waste in terms of waste management, and instead go to this model of the 9 R's, which is first, we refuse producing or consuming an item. Then we rethink how items are produced. Then we reduce our production and our consumption of items. we reuse things and repair them and refurbish them first. Then we remanufacture and repurpose, finally getting to recycling. So it's a new model of a linear way of thinking about our production and consumption. And so it's a good example. And when you go through the report, you'll be able to click on all these links to check out all these neat examples that we have. So through our collaboration with Polko and the Telosa community, we are developing a new index that will help bring these 6 categories together to improve the quality of life of residents in the community. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to John again, who's going to introduce the next speaker and keep moving forward with the webinar before we get to the focus groups.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Krista. Well, it's a real pleasure to introduce our partners at POLCO as experts in the field of community engagement and analytical solutions. And with their help and expertise, we're working together to take ideas and concepts that we're developing to create what we feel be a very definitive index that will serve communities. We're differentiating with a focus on community connections, which you'll hear. We're measuring and tracking what matters to people. The approach is much more inclusive than what's available today, and we're using real data and a very rigorous methodology. And with that background, I want to introduce Michelle as Senior Vice President of Innovation at Polko. She also helped found the National Research Center more than 20 years ago. And I want to introduce Tobin McKieran, our VP of Data Science at Polko, a strategic and people-focused leader that has served as senior economist on the President's Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, a career Air Force officer with 25 years of experience in risk and project management, along with statistical forecasting and data analysis. With that, I'd like to introduce Michelle and Tobin.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. And I'm going to share my screen so that everyone can get a little love of that. All right. Tom said early on that we know strong communities lead to greater opportunity and more benefits in a myriad of ways. And then Krista supported that with her 6 vital characteristics, one of those being that social capital and belonging leads to thriving communities. John said early on, we know this all empirically. And Tom did show that scatter plot with the line going through it. Michelle and I get to actually stick to the empirics and stick to the data and show you why it is we all think this. We do both work for Polko. Polko kind of came around because we want to be able to put useful data into the hands of local government leaders. We're also part of the NRC, which you can think of as kind of the think tank of Polko. So how we're going to go through our 10, 15-minute spiel, we are going to first stick to justifying the need for this index with data, supporting what you have heard already. We're going to then show you some national trends with our data, which unfortunately points to us doing this from a bowling alone perspective. And then we're going to move on to show the work we've been doing to identify the indicators we actually want to put into the index. And then finally, we'll show you those indicators we are putting in the index and what we're proposing we make it. And so let's go ahead and get into the data so we can see it. So the first set of data I'm going to show you comes from our National Community Survey. This survey we developed about 20 years ago, along with the ICMA. It goes around to many different communities within the country, basically trying to figure out the residents' opinion of a myriad of things. This is just giving you some stats where you can see where our data is coming from, of how many implementations we've had, how many voices it represents, the different representativity we've gotten from it. And so in our NCS, we ask, amongst many things, we ask our residents to please rank the importance and quality their government, their city, their community provides in these 10 different domains. And so we can see from the residents' opinion, how important are all of these different domains. And we went through and modeled, we created a few different models, one trying to figure out, well, if it's the community as a place to live, how do these domains really weigh in? If it's an overall quality of life, how do these community domains weigh in? And if it's an index of community quality. What was awesome to us, given the importance we all place on this, is that when we do that, no matter how we modeled it, inclusivity and engagement always bubbled up to the top. It bubbled up to number 3, right below safety, and economy. So it was more important to the residents in every situation than all of the other domains, really just pointing to the importance of community connection, of feeling inclusive, feeling engaged as a person. Shouldn't be a surprise that safety and economy, Maslow's hierarchical needs, would place above that. But the fact that this comes in as the most important following those two was really supporting our idea that we need to get some community connection index in order to show how a community is doing. This also comes from the NCS, where we ask, how is it that you feel in these different areas? And the residents can rate this anywhere between poor, good, poor, fair, good, and excellent, or don't know. And we find that 7 and 10 rank good or excellent, that their connection and engagement with their community, or that their residents feel welcome in their community. We find that 6 and 10 value respecting residents from diverse backgrounds, feel like there is a sense of community, feel like there is openness and acceptance. And while 7 and 10 and 6 and 10 is not bad, I think we could all agree that we could do better. And in our NCS, a lot of our other questions that I'm not showing because they don't have anything to do with the Community Connections Index, they'll get rankings of 8 or 9 out of 10, where people are ranking them as excellent or good. So in our Community Connections, when we're getting 7 of 10 is how our community is doing, and 6 of 10 is how our community is doing, we consider that below the level that we would like it to be at, and we know we can get better. So it's not that we're doing horrible with Community Connections, but we're not as connected as we were years ago, when people were going out and talking to their neighbors, when people felt welcome to come into their community, when there was a sense of pride within your community. That stuff has decreased over the past decades, and we know that we can make it better. And then the last piece of data I'm going to show from the NCS is discussing local trust in government. All of us are probably well aware of the eroding confidence in our federal government. And while that confidence has eroded far worse than the local, we have also seen a decline in the past few years of confidence and trust in our local government. And so here I'm just trying to show you that out of our surveys that we give across the nation, we are seeing a significant drop since 2020, really, of trust and confidence in our local government. And so the next data set I'm going to pull from is from a data set where we have partnered with a few different groups. You can see on the left, University of Wisconsin, Arizona State, ICMA, and Stanford's Hoover Institute. And we partnered with them in order to create a data set that allows us to really quickly give any city or county official a state of their community. This is done at the county level often. It's not normally done at the city level because of a lot of the complexities of putting all this data together. This, though, allows us to then compare any city to another city to see how it is that we're doing. There's over 200 actionable indicators. We classify them into these 6 different domains that you're seeing in this donut chart. This is slightly different than our NCS, and it's different right now because we don't have enough data points in some of the areas we need in order to plush it up to the 10 domains we know are most important for a community. And so those domains might be a subdomain in some of these overarching big domains. This is just showing you, I'm not expecting you to memorize this list, but I will test you on 5 of them at the end of this webinar to see how many you remember. These are just all the different data sets that we pull from in order to create that GPAL comprehensive data set showing how your city or county is doing. And so what do we get from this data? Well, from this data, we can pull, amongst many things, an equity scorecard that shows, hey, how are you doing as a community when it comes to economic equity? And so the Gini coefficient is a great way and a internationally recognized way that we can measure income equality or inequality. The closer we are to 0, the more equality there is. The closer we are to 1, the more inequality. So while we're not horrible, because we're not up there near 1, we could obviously get better. Racial segregation, 0 would be complete integration, 1 would be complete segregation. Again, we are better than we were, well, not again, but we are better than we were 50 years ago, but we're still not where we want to be. We would like to get that value down to 0. These next 3, this ratio of women's to men's earnings, ratio of women's to men's poverty rates, and ratio of BIPOC to white person poverty rates, all of these, we would like that ratio to be 1 to 1. We would like women to be making the same as men. We would like women, I mean, we'd like it to go to 0 for poverty rate if we could, but we at least want them on equal footing. And we also would like the BIPOC and white persons to be on equal footing. So the closer we can get to 1, the better we would be. And all of these, you can see we are not at 1. We can do better. And this social vulnerability index, so here, the lowest, it goes from lowest to highest, and we would like to be closer to 1 on this, closer to 0 on this, so that we were at least less vulnerable. We can get better. Right now, we are sitting at a place where we have improved somewhat from where we were 30 years ago, but we still got a lot more room we can go. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to step in to talk about the next parts.
Great, thank you. We saw earlier in the webinar, well, first of all, I should say I'm super excited to be here because community livability and the social fabric and underpinnings of community livability is one of my favorite topics. But now, starting with that, just want to talk about the fact that, we started with Krista and Tom and John making arguments for the importance of community connections in terms of how important it is for community livability. And Tobin showed data to show they're correct. Like the literature, the expert review, and our data from the voice of residents across the nation definitely demonstrate that social connections, the social fabric, community connections are key to community livability. The other thing that we just saw is Tom had mentioned, social capital, the decline of social capital, and Tobin demonstrated too, we're not doing great. In many communities, we're still kind of bowling alone. So that really arguments and cements the idea that we really need a way to measure community connections within a community. And that brings us to the index we're talking about today. Next slide, please. So in this index, one of the things we want to talk about now, we came together as a group thinking it was important because we all agreed that people and their connections are the heart and soul of a community. Telosa is founded on this concept. We know this from a lot of the work we would do with local governments across the country, but we really believe that social fabric is really important. We also know, Tom discussed some of the benefits, but we know social capital in the literature and research studies is linked to many positive outcomes. If you have a strong sense of community social capital, you have better health outcomes, you have a better economy, you have better education, you have a bit more safety. So we know we need to build it. The one thing we also know is the conventional models that rank countries versus each other, states versus each other, cities versus each other, often compare a lot on economic measures, GDP, unemployment rates, safety measures, and health. And not that those issues are not super important in defining a thriving, vibrant community, but we know that basically many of them ignore the social fabric, that social connections, the community connections. So we want to call light to that in the work we're doing. And it really falls into the idea that we need to measure what matters. In my work with local governments for the last 25 years, I know if you decide to measure something, people are more intentional and it becomes a priority. And when we use these indicator systems that focus mostly on income and safety, we're neglecting some points that we all know here are super important. So we know, and we've established through our data and our lit searches and our best practice research that it's important, and we know that we're lacking. So we really want to move forward in trying to really understand this and create an index that makes an actionable tool for communities to help themselves move forward into the future. Next slide, please. So in the process of creating an index, and we've done this quite a bit at Polco, this is kind of how we start. We want to first look at the literature and best practice review, and the Telosa team has really done this. They did a thorough job at looking at all these best practices, the literature, and what it means to be a thriving, vibrant community, and what building community means to that. There's the analysis of existing data. Tobin showed you some information. I'm going to show you a bit more, but really grounding this index in data is important to us as well. We want to have a community dialogue, and that's where you all come in, because we're going to ask you to actually help us think about this index and how to make it meaningful, actionable, and important. And then eventually we'll be testing the index. And then the goal is to use this index with communities across the nation so they can actually learn to be more connected. And also for Telosa as a foundation in terms of building and measuring its progress towards meeting its goals. Next slide, please. So one of the ideas when you start to develop an indicator system on our index, you have to think about the number of items you're going to measure and what items are going to be measured, because what you measure matters, like I talked about earlier. So one of the things we're thinking about is what are the key indicators that would reflect a connected community? What would that look like? And so we decided to kind of turn to those POLCO, these huge data sets we have of national community opinions, as well as public data, to understand what are the key drivers of community connections. But not only that, just also what are the key drivers of overall community livability, because we want to make sure we capture those drivers into our index. Next slide, please. So what we did is, and Aaron Caldwell, who is our colleague here in the audience, actually did a lot of this work. But basically, we looked at the relationship of 200 indicators of community livability and looked how they affected residents' opinions of communities that have great quality of life, communities that are great places to live. And we also dug down deeper and looked at 50 or so indicators of community connections and seeing how important they are in terms of being a connected community and making people feel like they have a sense of community and social cohesion. Next slide, please. And here's what we found. When we did that general model of quality of life, now Tobin presented results kind of at a macro level of what factors were important to quality of life. But when we throw those 200 plus different variables in different models, what we find is this is what comes out. Again, we see the same trends that Tobin suggested. Safety and economy, Maslow's hierarchy, are always going to be really important predictors in quality of life, quality of the community, what people are looking for. But once you get past those two indicators, what comes up next, again, is that community connections. And more specifically, it's neighborliness, people feeling included, having a sense of community and community pride, and equity. And in those areas, we also looking at like whether poverty is equitable across all groups, what's food security looking like. And then we also see quality of government services and public trust. So again, showing the same data that Tobin did, but with a little more specificity. And for us, when we're developing this index, we're thinking, we want to take those 4 or 5 variables from the bottom of the screen and use it in our index because it's important to quality of life. So therefore, we want to make sure we measure that. Next slide. When we dig deeper into the community connections, so now we're modeling people who rate their sense of community very high, people who rate their resident connection with their community really high. And we get more variables that come into this model. But again, this is just information to give us insights into what indicators are really key to understanding civic connection, community connection. And so what we find is a number of variables come to the top of the list that have to do with community, your sense of community, neighborliness, inclusivity, taking care of vulnerable residents, and then the opportunities that are provided in the community. Can we do social events? Can we participate in community manners? Are there special events, festivals? We found those were really important in people deciding if their community was strong. We also found that resident engagement behaviors were a strong component of this characteristic. So how much do people affiliate with groups? Do they give to charities? Do they give to civic causes? Are they neighborly themselves? Do they mix with residents of other backgrounds? We find these variables are really key to creating a really strong social fabric. Next slide. And then the other areas we found is equity became a big issue, that racial segregation that Tobin talked about, the Gini income of equality and income, social vulnerability, and food security. Communities that have a strong sense of community have less issues with equity than communities that suffer from that. And then governance came out again. We want communities where you're confident in your government, you trust the government services, you feel good about the values, services, taxes paid. And then some other areas that are important is, again, people always feel safe, that the K through 12 education is strong. There are job opportunities. And then the land use comes in, where we found a lot of the models reflected public places where people want to spend time, those areas that land use and placemaking fit in and kind of bring people together. Those are important predictors when we look at many, many predictors of what community, sense of community and community connectedness might look like. Next slide. So now let's put it all together. So we did, the Telosa team did a wonderful amount of work looking at the literature, best practices, having expert review, and finding what really contributes to vibrant and thriving communities. And here's the characteristics that we saw Krista talk about earlier. Well, now we've taken the POLCO data where we've mined national data sets, looked at resident opinions, looked at public data, and we find what we see are being the key drivers of community livability and community connections. And you'll see there's a lot of synergy, a lot of convergence. And so we see that a lot of the areas are the same: community, equity, safety, governance, all those types of things lead together to make a really strong community. Now, one of the things we wanted to do is, and one of the things you may, if you've thought a lot about community connections, as we all have over the last few months, is they're all really related. And there's so many different variables that are touched by community connections. So we could measure lots of things to create an index that measures community connections. But what we wanted to do, we decided to as a team do, is we really wanted this index to be somewhat simple and somewhat actionable. So we've spent hours looking at all this information, putting it together, and next slide. And we put it together in this initial framework. And we're going to ask you in the focus group or discussions afterwards to kind of give us your feedback on it. But I just wanted to show this model right now. And again, understanding that this is just a piece of community livability, we believe that this, as well as other types of indicators, would lead to a larger model of community quality of life. But we really wanted to focus on the issues that have to do with connected community that folks have been kind of ignoring and that we think matter the most to get people focused. So the first section would be on social cohesion. So we want to look at sense of community, civic pride. Do you trust your fellow residents? Equity inclusion, we saw from the models, are important. We want residents to all feel welcome, have equal access to resources. Diversity is honored and celebrated. We think equity inclusion is really important. Civic participation, we want to look at these resident engagement. Like, are they voting? Are they volunteering? Are they participating in community decisions? Are they participating in civic clubs? But are they actually doing their civic job, responsibility? Are they taking that seriously? Social participation. Are they neighborly? Are they participating in clubs? Are they participating in, government amenities? So they're all kind of actually building that social fabric of a community. Then we look at strong institutions. This was one of the issues we struggle with the model, because we know safety and jobs and healthcare, all those things are really important to community connections. But we decided to place those into a category that really had to do kind of in that Robert Putnam model of strong institutions, where we need all these institutions to be strong and have trust in them to really build those connections. And then finally, and I think what's kind of unique to our model versus any types of models that have been done in the past, is really this placemaking. And Krista made some strong arguments for placemaking and community design. But I do think it's underlooked in many communities how important it is that you design your communities to actually help support the social fabric. So walkability, public places where people want to spend time, public art, vibrant commercial centers, all the things we can do with land use is really a strong contributor to connected communities. So we believe the index will have some characteristics of, did you design your community in a way that really facilitates community connections in a strong way? And so this is the draft framework we want you to react to. Next slide. And so we're going to kick off the focus groups or our discussions with this question, and we'll read it to you again so you don't have to memorize it. But really want you to think about, do you think your community would benefit from an index, and using this index as a way to gauge progress and to set priorities for work. But what we're going to do now is break you into groups. Next slide, please. And you're going to end up in one of 5 rooms with one of these 5 facilitators and some note takers. And we're going to have a discussion where we have 4 or 5 questions for you about this index, because again, a priority of having the community, the folks who are supporting Telosa, and also just residents in general and communities across the nation. We want to get your feedback on if this index is actionable, if it's useful, and how we can really set up models for communities to become more successful in becoming vibrant and thriving. So you will now be taken to a Zoom room, and we'll see you back here after the conversations.
Welcome back, everyone. In the final few minutes that we have, I just want to start with some important thanks to our expert speakers. We had Krista, Tom, and our partners at Polka. We had Tobin and Michelle. Really want to thank them. Our great facilitators with Krista, Kristen, Michelle, Pete, and Dan. And of course, want to thank all of you for taking the time to participate and exchange ideas and be engaged. It was really terrific to see a lot of great insights. And really appreciate all the input from our growing community as we work together to realize the mission and hopefully more of a thriving a series of communities. What I wanted to do is share sort of one key point from each of the small group discussions, so everyone has sort of a flavor for what was discussed in the other small breakouts. And then maybe a couple concluding remarks, and we'll wrap up in the next few minutes. So I ask if you can sort of stay for a couple minutes, and maybe I'll go around the room. Peter, do you want to start with just a quick key point from your group?
Yeah, okay, I will. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we had a nice discussion. Overall, everybody felt like the index is good, but maybe it was missing a few things. So, for instance, we did talk about the importance of food on a connected community. We talked about the need for fun to be included in there, which may be in the placemaking category. We also talked about the need for what types of companies or businesses, or what's the outlook for employment, and where does that fit in within a connected community. But while we all agree that the index is good, there was a discussion about how do you measure that this city is tracking towards cohesion and community engagement, and also but the way communication is these days with digital and technology, how is that accounted for?
Great. Thank you, Peter, and your group. Dan, you want to share some comments?
So our group talked about a lot of interesting topics, a lot surrounding the built environment. But I'll talk about this one aspect that we were having a hard time trying to define and quantify, which is the idea of neighborliness. And it's sort of an ineffable quality that we can start to think about when we think about the way a neighborhood feels when we talk about people who are renting out versus homeowners, and trying to feel how the sense of community develops from that. And it's not an easy thing to figure out, but it's one to start questioning.
Great. Michelle?
Sorry, I got to unmute myself. We also had some really interesting discussions, and some of the things we thought might be missing a bit from the index is sports and recreation, creativity, but and a really, I think, had an important discussion about building kind of civic behaviors and skill building of people to be civic and neighborly and be able to be in conflict and have conversations, in terms of just being able to create those skills in a community as we move forward. Also talked a bit about equity and how equity, diversity, and how those elements pay together, and how that can make a challenge for a community, and how to keep groups in line with their culture, but also then be inviting to other groups, and how we build those community and that pride that we've seen in older cities. But talked about a lot more than that. Also, one more thing to mention, talked about more just how to make it concrete and tangible so that the index can really move forward and help people with these hard decisions that have to be made in communities, sometimes when it has to do with affordable housing and issues such as that.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And I guess as we start to finish up, Kristen?
Yeah, we had a great discussion. I feel like everyone really contributed a lot there. I think on the index part, I think it's making, the word index maybe is not commonplace for everyone. Like the spirit of it, bringing that out and bringing out the education around what does this mean, and maybe focusing on different aspects of it. And then we spoke a lot about community and about like how community needs to have a lot of options, right? We're trying to get everyone to feel included, all the different people, and making a lot of programming and options that people can choose to participate or not. And so having that option too, and even that can be part of some of the measurement and index, like how are people participating or not in some of the activities and organizations of the community.
Great. And Krista?
Yeah, I think we heard a lot of what everybody else said. Overall, great idea. However, the metrics and how we measure it needs to be impartial and transparent. And so a lot of thought was on that. And that we're not tokenizing voices, but people are really heard in this process, and making sure their voices are heard and included is important. We did talk a lot about authenticity and sincerity, and it especially being emanated and modeled from the leadership, and making sure that permeates throughout the entire process. So basically looking at our group norms and really living them throughout the process. So lots of good notes we have from folks.
I think one other point that, while measurement is important, what was deemed perhaps most important was the actionable steps that follow. And then also there's a lot that was mentioned, but the importance of education, more cultural awareness, and accessibility. So a lot of good points that we'll follow up on. So I guess as we start to wrap up, a couple of key takeaways, really, that everyone can build community, and really contributes to creating a thriving society. As follow-up, we want to make sure that those questions that we didn't get to today, that we will address and respond to on our Telosa community network. The QR code is on the screen right now, so I'd encourage you to go in there, sign up, and we'll have those available shortly. We'll also work on having a sort of final findings report, which you have now in draft form. We'll have that later in the fall. And the Community Connections Index will keep this group informed of the progress, and will incorporate your insights and input, which we look forward to continuing to hear. So with that, we want to thank you again for time, attention, insights, and participation. And you know, I think that the most important part is that people and connection are, as Michelle said, are at the heart of a successful, thriving city. And that's what we're striving for with your help. So again, thank you so much, and look forward to continuing the dialogue with you.